Tonight, Vladimir Putin says he'll back a ceasefire in Ukraine, but only on his terms. Russia's president insists there are serious questions about who would police the truce as his troops make advances on the battlefield. He met Donald Trump's peace envoy in Moscow as Washington sent a message: do the right thing.
A lot of the details of a final agreement have actually been discussed. Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world.
Ukraine has dismissed Moscow's response as manipulation and called for more sanctions. But can Putin be forced into ending the war? Also coming up, the protesters who stormed Trump Tower in support of a Palestinian student facing deportation. Bigger than London, 5 times heavier than Mount Everest, the megaberg now posing a danger to penguins and even the Earth's ability to cool itself. Plus,
I got the baby bonnet.
try that with a crocodile, what Australia's Prime Minister told his hunting influencer after her viral video with a baby wombat. That's all coming up on The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Good evening. What does Vladimir Putin really want? We've been waiting to find out what the Russian president would demand in exchange for a ceasefire. Well, today he confirmed what we've sort of known all along, that he's going to make it as difficult as possible for Ukraine. And here's why.
How are they going to use these 30 days? Will they use it to continue the forced mobilization, to supply weapons, to train those who are mobilized to those areas?
He doesn't want to give up his gains on the battleground, so he made his red lines clear. No NATO membership for Ukraine, no NATO peacekeeping troops inside Ukraine, and the implication that Moscow should keep all territory seized since 2014. But that last demand will be the sticking point, because while Ukraine accepts it won't be able to take back its land by military force, it does hope that it could happen in the future through patient diplomacy.
The question is about for what we are ready and for what we are not. How Ukraine is able to give up its territories, that's insane, to be honest.
Well, that was Ukraine's president back in 2023, but he's softened his tone since then. Then there is the other big unknown, the unpredictability of Donald Trump. Will he threaten to withdraw military aid again if Kyiv refuses to sign?
He put out a very promising statement, but it wasn't complete. And yeah, I'd love to meet with him or talk to him.
Will he make good on his threats of financial pain for Russia? And even if he does, will that be enough to force Vladimir Putin's hand? Lots to get into tonight, but let's get started in Moscow. Ivor Bennett has our first report.
There was a special guest in Moscow today. In one of these cars, Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's chief negotiator, here to deliver a peace proposal to Vladimir Putin. But despite the motorcade and police escort, it clearly wasn't that special. Because the first person the Russian president met was old friend Alexander Lukashenko. For several hours, while Witkoff waited, he discussed bilateral relations with the Belarusian leader. A typical Putin power play to show America who's in charge. But eventually, after a signing ceremony, he addressed the ceasefire deal, making clear his agreement comes with strings attached.
So the idea itself is correct, and we certainly support it. But there are issues that we need to discuss, and I think we need to discuss it with our American colleagues and partners.
He did eventually discuss it with America's envoy Witkoff, but away from the cameras.
Vladimir Putin said that any peace deal had to eliminate the root causes of the conflict. Now, in his mind, that's NATO's eastward expansion, rather than his own invasion. And it's a sign that he'll only agree to a ceasefire if Russia's own security concerns are met, namely that Ukraine never joins NATO.
And here's why. In Russia's Kursk region, Moscow can smell victory, on the verge of finally repelling Ukraine's forces 7 months after their incursion. Vladimir Putin doesn't want to lose his advantage.
So how will these 30 days be used? To continue forced mobilization in Ukraine? To supply weapons there? To train newly mobilized units? Or will none of this be done?
Over in Washington, another president, another press conference, and optimism that Putin will do as he's asked.
I do have leverage, but I don't want to talk about leverage now, because right now we're talking to him, and based on the statements he made today, they were pretty positive, I think. So I don't want to talk about that. I hope Russia's going to make the deal too. And I think once that deal happens, you're never going to be in a process. I don't think they're going back to shooting again.
But for now in Ukraine, the shooting and shelling continues. Here, peace can't come soon enough. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Moscow.
Well, you've heard Russia's red lines. Now let's remind you what America and Ukraine want. After meetings in Jeddah, negotiators proposed a 30-day interim ceasefire on all fronts. President Zelenskyy has agreed to that plan, but has emphasised his own priorities: security guarantees for Ukraine, the release of Ukrainian prisoners of war, and a path to NATO membership. He's spoken tonight and responded to Vladimir Putin's comments. Let's have a listen.
We've all heard Russia's predictable and manipulative response from Putin regarding the idea of a ceasefire. He's already preparing to refuse. Putin, of course, is afraid to tell President Trump directly that he wants to prolong the war and continue killing Ukrainians. That's why, in Moscow, they're framing the idea of silence with such preconditions that either nothing will work at all or it will be delayed as long as possible. This is a common tactic of Putin. He rarely says no outright, but instead creates delays that make real decisions impossible. We see this as yet another Russian manipulation.
Well, let's cross live now to Mark Stone at the White House in just a moment, but first to Ivor Bennett, who's in Moscow for us. And Ivor, let's decode those comments from Vladimir Putin today. He appeared to agree to a truce on the surface, but seemingly there's a lot more going on.
Yeah, that's right, Gillian. And I think that was always going to be the case because Vladimir Putin doesn't like to be pushed into a corner. He doesn't like to have deals imposed on him. He likes to be the one calling the shots. So I think we all knew that he was never going to give his agreement to this plan for a 30-day immediate ceasefire without any conditions. His agreement comes at a price. Now, he didn't specify exactly what that price is in that press conference held inside the Kremlin this evening, but I think he did allude to it with that comment I mentioned in my report there, referring to the root causes of the conflict. That is a refrain that Moscow has been repeating for several months, and it keeps coming back to. And it follows this report from the Reuters news agency this morning that Moscow had presented the US with 3 demands that need to be met for it to agree to this truce. And those are reportedly no NATO membership for Ukraine, an agreement not to deploy European troops as peacekeepers in Ukraine in the future as some kind of security backstop, and international recognition of Russia's claim to Crimea and those 4 territories in eastern Ukraine which Moscow has annexed. And those are, of course, Russia's red lines that have remained the same for months, and it is essentially Moscow's maximalist position. Now, the Kremlin neither confirmed nor denied that it has made these demands, but listening to Vladimir Putin here this evening, even though he's talking about wanting peace, I think it's pretty clear that Russia is still showing no sign of making compromises or giving any concessions at all, suggesting that it's still after its maximalist position. So despite all the developments today, it feels like not much has changed. You heard Volodymyr Zelenskyy there accused Vladimir Putin of delay tactics today with this statement. Well, so long as Russia has the military advantage, time is on the Kremlin side.
To Mark next at the White House. Is Donald Trump running out of negotiating ground other than sanctions and tariffs? What else can he do to force Putin's hand?
Well, maybe he feels he doesn't need to force Putin's hand. Maybe he is, I think the concern in Ukraine, certainly, and across Europe, is that because Donald Trump wants a quick deal, because he wants to be able to stand here as soon as possible at the podium at the White House and say, I have achieved peace, I have stopped the fighting in Ukraine, because he is desperate to do that. He will go for a quick deal, and a quick deal in his mind, might just be to agree to pretty much those three maximalist demands that Ivar outlined there. No NATO troops on the ground or European troops, admitting that the east of Ukraine, that Crimea and the Donbass is part of Russia. He might just say, well, let's just agree to that, because that would achieve a stop to the fighting. But how on earth would Ukraine respond to that? They would not want to agree to any of that. The European countries wouldn't want to agree to no European troops on the ground. Britain and France have already offered them. And so what would they then do? Would they return to fighting? Well, maybe not, because remember, the Americans have got the Ukrainians over a barrel. They proved that last week when they turned the weapons flows off, they turned the intelligence sharing off. Elon Musk, well, he could turn Starlink off, that satellite system that he owns that allows Ukraine to operate on the battlefield. So the Americans, Donald Trump, has got Ukraine over a barrel and could force it, in a sense, to agree to Putin's demands. That is the concern among European nations, and certainly, I imagine, behind the scenes here in the White House, where Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, has spent much of the day. That, I think, is what he would gently have been trying to discuss with Donald Trump.
OK, Mark and Ivar, thank you both. Well, let's focus some more now on Vladimir Putin's strategy. Mikhail Kasyanov worked alongside him as Prime Minister of Russia between 2000 and 2004, and he joins me now. Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. You know Vladimir Putin well, worked as Prime Minister alongside him. When he says he agrees in principle to a ceasefire, what does he really mean?
That means he said, "Нет, no." Because just in fact, he rejected the unconditional ceasefire proposal, and in fact, Mr. Putin is not interested in a ceasefire at this particular period of time. He doesn't want to offend President Trump, but he definitely drag out time just saying we need a thorough research of details of this ceasefire, something like this. Yeah, that is absolutely clear that Putin doesn't want to stop here, and his demand, what he explained today, just the stop supply of weaponry to Ukraine. It means just he needs and would like to see Ukraine just weaker and weaker. He wants to continue conducting just this war of attrition, believing that he will destroy Ukraine.
Is this an out-and-out rejection, or is he stalling?
That's really he doesn't need in this period of time. In 6 months or 10 months from now, when just the accumulative effect of sanctions, which was imposed for a 3-year period of time, would start working on a general economy, not only on a state finance, but an economy. In this case, just later, in several months, Putin will be completely different position, worth position, and at that time would be possible to drag out of him just some kind of concessions. It means just overall support of Ukraine. Now it's necessary for those months so that Ukraine not only survive, but would get just better position.
What President Zelenskyy is saying tonight is that really that Putin is denying the deal, he's refusing the deal, and actually what needs to happen is more sanctions need to be put on Russia.
President Trump just stated that he's prepared to impose devastating sanctions. Let's see what will happen, what the decision President Trump would make.
And do you believe that that's what will happen, that that's the only thing that will force Putin to sign a ceasefire deal?
I think yes, but in general, I don't think just in principle, I don't think President Trump would undertake these efforts. Although today he didn't prolong just important things, just license for have just banking payments for export of oil. It is a really sensitive point for Putin. But of course, the sanctions, effect of sanctions growing, and it depends on President Trump, and especially on support, on the continuous support of Ukraine, providing finance and providing weapons. That's important thing, just to let Ukraine to survive during this period, during this month, which coming month.
Do you think that the red lines that President Putin has drawn, do you think he knows that they are unacceptable, that Ukraine wants to move towards NATO membership, that there is the thought that there should be peacekeeping teams, either from European or NATO, inside Ukraine? Does he know that these things are unacceptable? Is that why he's drawing these red lines?
Those red lines, that's for negotiations on the peace agreement. Right now, just he doesn't want to accept just immediate ceasefire agreement, unconditional, because just he wants to understand what will be happen in the end. And in the end, exactly what you have just explained, that's a maximalist position of Putin. Just he even requires just more territory. But again, that is some kind of playing game, just not coming just to real negotiations now. As a first step, is evident for everyone, just to have a comprehensive negotiations. You need ceasefire agreement first, but Putin doesn't want to get it.
You've worked with President Putin closely, obviously. We're seeing pictures of you in the past, during that period between 2000 and 2004. Is he playing games? You suggested, allude to the fact that he could be playing games. For instance, today he kept Steve Witkoff waiting for 8 hours. What's the thinking behind that?
That's tactics of Mr. Putin, that I think a way of behavior, trying to create an illusion that he's so important, just keeping people waiting, etc. But he demands respect to himself, and that's always was the case. And these days he demanding or would like to sit down with President of the United States and decide the fate of the world, rather than just to be part of the regional conflict. And that is clear right now. In my time, that was not really real games. And that time, Putin supported economic reforms of my cabinet initiated, and we had excellent relations with the United States. We had excellent relations with Great Britain, with the European Union. We were strategic partners. And later, after my departure, Putin, just 2 years after, just changed completely his attitude, his policy vis-a-vis the West. And right now, we just having the awful situation. But it was a completely different Putin. But of course, desire of Putin to play a game and just thinking that he could overplay just others, that's exactly the case. And right now he's trying, although it's difficult right now, but he's trying to play this game. And we'll see just whether Mr. Trump will be subject of this game, and Putin just overpress the situation in his favor. I don't want to believe that it happened, because just the Europe and Great Britain just take a unified position, but that's decision right now of Mr. Trump is necessary.
Mikhail Kasyanov, former Prime Minister of Russia between 2000 and 2004. Thank you very much for sharing your insight with us. Thank you. As peace talks go back and forth, the war rages on, and Sky News can reveal how Donald Trump's foreign aid cuts are hurting humanitarian efforts on Ukraine's front line. Volunteers say they were relying more than ever on USAID, just as the president pulled the plug. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire reports.
2 drones had already exploded into the hospital in Sumy. Volunteers, including Alexei Kluyev, rushed to the site. Then the 3rd drone hit. 11 people died in this Russian attack in September.
Це дійсно дуже жахливі звуки. These are horrible sounds. What you hear is terrible. And so, of course, when we came out of the building, it was shocking. It was a shocking scene.
Alexei filmed this video. He lives in Sumy, the northeastern region of Ukraine that was temporarily occupied by Russia and is now under intense bombardment. And he's part of Dobrobat, a volunteer organisation that focuses on fast recovery, repairing buildings after they've been hit. Fixing windows to keep out the bitter winter keeps people, especially older people, alive. But they relied on USAID to fund much of that work, and funding has now been paused. That pause in USAID funding, what effect has it already had on your work?
We have to be realistic. We have to recognise that Ukraine has lost a reliable partner, a partner that has been helping all this time to overcome both military and social problems. It's probably the hardest moment since 2022, because even back then, when we had convoys of occupiers marching through our city, the scale of destruction was not what we're seeing now.
Dobrobat received 2 million Ukrainian hryvnia for the Windows project, worth around £38,000 from USAID to repair buildings. This was its last grant, 115,000 hryvnia to cover tools, extension cords, floodlights. That was part of a total of $5.4 billion given by USAID to Ukraine last year. It covered more than 200 projects in Ukraine, many on the front line, including this underground school in Kharkiv and this hospital in Kherson. A project to restore medical services here was also suspended because it was one among the 83% of USAID contracts that Secretary of State Marco Rubio said would be cut. One lobby group estimates that nearly 60,000 jobs have gone globally as a result. An aid worker with operations in Ukraine, who asked to remain anonymous, told us, "I'm in the process of terminating nearly 100 staff, people who've worked tirelessly to serve the front line of Russia's war against Ukraine, war widows, women whose husbands are on the front lines or in hospital. I have vendors who have not been paid for generators they delivered and installed, so frontline communities in Ukraine have access to water, light and heat. These suppliers are going to need to go back to these communities and remove this life-saving equipment." Alexei sent us this video afterwards of other wrecked buildings in Sumy that they had planned to repair. The boarding was meant to be a stopgap. The homes are only half patched up. Without USAID money, it is all they can do. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
All this week, we've been following President Trump's escalating trade war and the resulting tit-for-tat tariffs. Well, today we heard the biggest number yet. Mr. Trump is threatening to slap a 200% duty on alcohol from the EU if the bloc goes ahead with retaliatory levies on American products next month. The US is Ireland's biggest market for whiskey, which is why both the Irish Prime Minister and the head of the Irish Whiskey Association, both in Washington today, are so concerned.
The effective way to deal with this is through dialogue between the European Union and the United States government. And we've seen some patterns emerge in terms of the ongoing engagement between the US and Canada and Mexico. In terms of the European Union and the United States, it needs to get to the dialogue stage because tariffs harm business.
A proposal for 200% tariffs on any EU product going into the US would be devastating for us. So this is obviously very worrying for us. What I would say, however, is the EU have made their announcement on US whiskey. Donald Trump has now responded to that. But there is time and there's space before this tariff goes into effect.
While all of that has been going on in Washington, Trump Tower in New York has been stormed by protesters. Well, they occupied the building's lobby, demanding the release of Columbia University student and US resident Mahmoud Khalil. The Trump administration is working to deport him over his pro-Palestinian activism and have accused him of supporting Hamas.
We're saying roughly 150 people entered Trump Plaza. We made 98 arrests. Those arrests are for trespassing, obstructing government administration, and resisting arrest by virtue of us having to carry some of the people out.
Well, let's cross to our US correspondent, James Matthews. And James, Mahmoud Khalil hasn't been charged. So how big a test of the constitutional right to free speech will his case be?
It's very much a test case, Gillian. Certainly that's the way it's seen by those protesters. Around 100 were arrested today in that central atrium area of Trump Tower. It was organised by Jewish Voice for Peace. And the way they put it in a statement is in calling for the release of Mahmoud Khalil. They say this is further proof that we are on the brink of a full takeover by what they call a repressive, authoritarian regime. This Mahmoud Khalil, 30 years old, Syrian-born, he has a green card, has permanent US residency. His wife is 8 months pregnant. He was arrested going into his university accommodation at the weekend. His alleged offence is that he was handing out Hamas-supporting flyers during Columbia University protests last summer. He denies that. His lawyers deny that. They are fighting that now through the courts. But it's a test of free speech because it goes to the heart of the First Amendment of the US Constitution, which is the right to freedom of speech. And his supporters say that if he loses this case, then there are many others who will follow on. President Trump backs that up, actually. He's issued a statement talking about what happens next after the deportation, as he would have it, of Mahmoud Khalil. Talks about how his arrest is the first of many to come, and says there are other students who engaged in what he calls pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic and anti-American activity. Currently, Mahmoud Khalil is detained in a detention centre in Louisiana, Gillian. His lawyers will have a hearing this week, and we'll get a sense of where that goes in terms of the court process by the end of this week.
OK, James, thank you very much for the moment. Well, I can tell you that in the past few minutes, Columbia University has confirmed it has expelled or suspended some students who seized the building during the pro-Palestinian protest. Around 150 people took part in the demonstrations and dozens were arrested. So just to reiterate that update and that breaking news, that in the past few moments, Columbia University has confirmed that it has expelled or suspended some of those students who seized the building during the pro-Palestinian protest. We'll, of course, keep you updated on that story. Well, stay with us because coming up, we'll be focusing on the fight against malaria. Can genetically modified mosquitoes be our new weapon against the disease? We'll go inside a cutting-edge lab to find out.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No, no, no.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want them to be treated equally like everyone else.
It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
Are you diminished by claims that you're a racist?
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back. The fight against malaria and the mosquitoes that carry it is going down to a microscopic level. Scientists in London are genetically modifying the insects, hoping to stop them spreading the parasite, which kills hundreds of thousands of people every year. Our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, explains.
From foe to friend, could the mosquito actually end up being our ally in the fight against malaria? There are thousands from all over the world kept in cages at this insectary at Imperial College London, part of a project called Transmission Zero to genetically modify mosquitoes to kill the malaria parasite within them.
You will see that they will start feeding on your hand.
So it can't be passed on to humans when they bite.
These are exogenous genes that we bring into the mosquito. They are known antimicrobial molecules from other species. For example, one of them we're using is from the honeybee. Right? We need this modification to propagate, to spread, so that every mosquito eventually in Africa, every malaria-transmitting mosquito at least, will carry this.
The genes from the honeybee and also a type of frog are injected into mosquito eggs under a microscope. They produce a protein that is toxic to the malaria parasite. Then, with another genetic technique, scientists are able to ensure all the descendants of the mosquito inherit the same ability to kill the parasite.
According to the World Health Organization, almost 600,000 people died from malaria in 2023. Most of them were in Africa. 3/4 of them were children under the age of 5. Bed nets, insecticides, drugs and vaccines are only partly effective, and that's why scientists here say they need to try something new.
The mosquitoes can't be released until the genetic modification is shown to be safe, but the genes can't be passed on to other insects.
So we have to prove in the lab that it works, and it works the way we want it to work. And then we have to prove that it is safe. It doesn't cause any additional harm, any unintentional harm, both to people and the environment. It is accepted by the communities. It's accepted by the regulators before we're able to test them in the field.
It'll be several years before the technique is perfected and signed off by the regulators. But one day there may be no pills to take, no bed nets to worry about. The mosquito could be doing the hard work to eliminate malaria. Thomas Moore, Sky News at Imperial College in London.
This is The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Next up, bigger than London and 5 times the weight of Everest. We'll focus on the world's largest iceberg, which ran aground on a tiny British island.
we are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Now, it's about twice the size of Greater London, weighs 1 trillion tonnes and has run aground just off the remote South Atlantic British island of South Georgia. And that's where the mega iceberg called A23A is expected to break up and melt almost 40 years after it snapped off Antarctica. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, explains what it means for our warming world.
The world's largest iceberg has just run aground on the British territory of South Georgia. So what is a megaberg and what does it mean for the island and the rest of the planet? South Georgia is about 800 miles from where I'm standing here on the Falkland Islands. It's the first bit of ice-free land between Antarctica and the rest of the world. Iceberg A23A is vast, larger than Greater London at 1,200 square miles. It's nearly 300 metres thick, almost taller than the Shard, and it weighs around 1 trillion tonnes. Unlike many of Antarctica's massive icebergs, which rapidly break up and melt as they're carried north on ocean currents, A23A has been around for nearly 40 years. In 1986, it broke off from Antarctica's Filchner-Ronner ice shelf. It remained aground in the Weddell Sea for nearly 30 years, until 2020, when it started moving slowly north. By 2023, it cleared the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. Then in August last year, it became stuck in a revolving current. But it has since broken free and drifted straight for the UK territory of South Georgia. In the last few days, it ran aground on the rocky shelf around the island 50 miles from its southwest coast. There have been so few bergs this big, scientists don't really know if they're becoming more common or not, but A23A is symbolic of the rapid melting of Antarctica due to global warming. The continent is losing about 150 billion tonnes of ice every year, half of it due to icebergs like A23A breaking away, the rest due to water melting off the continent itself. A key concern is that all the fresh water melting out of that ice might be slowing down the deep ocean currents around the Antarctic, which are the single most important thing removing increasing levels of heat and carbon dioxide from our atmosphere. That A23A is effectively a symbol of how we're messing with our planet's cooling system.
And Tom is now on board an RAF patrol flight over the so-called megaberg. He sent us this update just before he took off.
From where I am in the Falkland Islands, it's 800 miles away off the coast of South Georgia. We've been here for a week now because of severe weather, unable to make it out there to get a glimpse of the iceberg. But now appears to be a window has opened and the Royal Air Force have kindly offered to take us out on their routine patrol flight on this A400 Atlas aircraft around the island of South Georgia that should give us the best opportunity anybody's had to get a close-up look at the iceberg, A23A. And remember, this is an enormous berg, 40 miles across, its area almost twice the size of Greater London. So if it's out there, we should see it, as long as the cloud cover isn't too bad. It's expected in the coming weeks to start breaking up, and we're hoping to see evidence of whether that's starting to happen, and that's important. There's officials here from the South Georgia government and from the Royal Navy who are interested to find out how that berg is breaking up, what kind of hazard it might pose to shipping in the area. There goes the Royal Air Force tanker as we speak. So if the wind doesn't get any worse, we'll be taking off to get out over that iceberg. It's about a 2-hour flight away, and hopefully get some decent close-up pictures of it for the first time.
We'll be catching up with Tom tomorrow, but in the meantime, joining me now is Mark Belchier, a marine ecologist at the British Antarctic Survey. Now, we know that it's huge, 1 trillion tonnes, larger than the size of Greater London, but is it unusual for South Georgia?
Not really. I think this berg has been exceptional just because of its sheer size, but South Georgia sits in Iceberg Alley, So about 90% of the icebergs that come off the Antarctic continent make their way into South Georgia's waters. So even in the last 5 years, we've had A68, which was of a similar sort of magnitude to A23. So it's not that common, but certainly not rare.
And is it dangerous? Because it's huge. What sort of damage can it do?
Well, when it's intact, it's obviously highly visible. It can be seen on radar. But now that it's become grounded, it's likely that it's grinding on the seafloor and being lifted by the tides. So will be potentially damaging the seabed and any of the organisms that live on the seafloor at around 300 meters. Okay. There have been concerns voiced that it could block the path to the feeding grounds for whales and seals. But we think this is very unlikely around South Georgia, just because the animals are able to swim around the berg, swim to other parts of the coast where the krill, where their feed aggregates.
So you don't think it is going to have an impact on surrounding wildlife?
Not a great deal. It certainly will have an impact on the sea floor at the moment. The other possible impact of an iceberg is as it melts, it can actually put nutrients into the water. Ice that's been accumulated over thousands of years in the ice above will leach into the surrounding water, and that can actually stimulate growth of what's called phytoplankton, or the plant plankton, and that can actually bring additional nutrients into the ecosystem. So that can be a positive benefit. But that's weighed against the what's called iceberg scour on the sea floor that will be sort of grinding and damaging the organisms there. But as the iceberg begins to, or potentially break up, and now that it's in a very dynamic part of the world's ocean, it's likely to happen fairly soon. But as the bits break off and carve, they become more of a hazard to shipping. And particularly at the moment, there are cruise ship vessels in the region. But as we move into winter, there's a very well-managed fishery that takes place in the South Georgia region. So I'm sure the fishing vessels will be keeping a very keen eye on what happens with the berg.
Yes, I was going to ask about sailors and fishermen, how this is going to impact them. I mean, their routines will have to be changed, no doubt, and their livelihoods are at stake.
Potentially, certainly when a similar berg grounded in the early 2000s, about 2003, 2004, it actually remained in a very similar location to where A23 is at the moment, and did prevent access of the vessels that set their long lines to catch something called Patagonian toothfish for a whole season. So there was about 60 miles of the what's called the shelf break, the continental shelf edge, that was off limits at that period. And that does present problems both for the fishermen, but also for the scientists that are monitoring the stocks that need to, for example, assess what the size of fish are in a particular area and get tagged fish back into the water.
And ultimately, just very finally, what will happen? Will it melt? And how long could that take?
Well, we're still seeing the remnants of the previous berg, which I think was A35 from 2 seasons ago. Parts of that are still circling around South Georgia at the moment. So it's possible that it could just drift off and head to the east towards the South Sandwich Islands. But there are very strong currents around South Georgia, and it could get caught in those systems as the bergs perhaps move out, get eroded and move over the continental shelf.
OK, Mark Belchier, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us, marine ecologist at the British Antarctic Survey. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And Tom will be sending back his images from his flight over A23A. Make sure you tune in tomorrow when we'll have special coverage for you then. This is The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Next up, why Australia is threatening to expel this hunting influencer after her viral video with a baby wombat.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer,
And that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do. Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island. The only way out now is by boat. Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first. Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound. Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets. This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Exclusively on Peacock. 2 teams, 1 city, everything on the line.
Gloves off, let them rip into each other again.
Arsenal.
Oh, that's a brilliant strike!
Victory can keep their title hopes alive.
Arsenal flying!
But Chelsea need all 3 points in their own chase for top 4.
Who else?
This is the Premier League. Streaming on Peacock.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Now to what the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is describing as an outrage. Sam Jones, an American who describes herself as an influencer, outdoor enthusiast and hunter, posted a video showing her grabbing a baby wombat, causing visible distress for the young marsupial and its mother. The video, now taken down, provoked anger across Australia and a review of Miss Jones's visa. Take a look.
Look at the mother. It's like, oh, it's chasing after her.
I caught a baby wombat. Okay, Mama's right there, and she is pissed. Let's let him go.
No, he's right.
All right, let's let him go. Come here, Mama. Come here.
To take a baby wombat from its mother and clearly causing distress from the mother is just an outrage. And, you know, I suggest to this so-called influencer, maybe she might try some other Australian animals. Take a baby crocodile from its mother and see how you go there. Take another animal that can actually fight back rather than stealing a baby wombat from its mother. See how you go there.
Well, strong criticism from the Australian Prime Minister there. Well, joining me now from Sydney is Danny, the Director of the Wombat Protection Society. Good evening to you. What did you first think when you saw that footage of the baby wombat being taken away from its mother?
Oh, it's a shocking sight. It's a shocking sight.
any stranger who separates a baby from its mother, whether it's a domesticated animal like a dog or a cat, causes incredible distress, let alone a wild animal. So, and the voiceover is shocking because it shows a lack of care and callousness on behalf of the person who's filming as well. They don't care about the distress call of the youngster. The young woman isn't handling the Joey properly. He could be injured by the way she's carrying him. He's struggling, he's calling for his mother, he's incredibly distressed. She could be causing an injury. I mean, it's just shocking. And the mother's running over, and then suddenly there's a cut in the video and the mother's running away. So we don't know if something's been done to the mother to make her go away. But, I mean, there are laws about interfering with our protected wildlife. They're different in every state. There are federal laws, and clearly the Prime Minister has shown the outrage that he and many, many Australians have felt seeing that absolutely selfish and ignorant act by the young woman and her partner. So, yeah, we're a wombat welfare and education organisation run by dedicated volunteers, and yeah, we just hate to see this sort of thing on social media. It breaks our heart. It's just outrageous.
What sort of harm does it cause the wombat, that type of interaction with a human being? Because in some species, you know that once they're touched by a human, that the mother can actually then reject them.
Yeah, well, there's no evidence that the baby and mother were reunited. So that baby is too young to survive on its own. We don't know if there is some injury caused to that Joey by the way he was mishandled and the way he was struggling and distressed while he was being incorrectly handled. His bottom wasn't being supported. He was being held by his front legs. There are various vets who have made this comment over the last couple of days on our public broadcaster over here. I mean, it beggars belief. It does show a complete lack of concern and care and callousness for the animal. It's a selfish act where someone just wants to get a social media post put up. So you can tell the animal's distressed. He's calling and he's struggling like anybody with any sense. So she's not only selfish, but she's very ignorant of handling any animals, let alone wildlife. So she places the Joey back on the side of the road where he's in danger of being hit by a car. So it's just extraordinary, just absolute ignorance. And I mean, someone said she calls herself a conservationist and biologist. Well, all I can say, she's got a long way to go because she really needs to be around and do a lot of learning. I hope she's learnt from this. I mean, there's obviously been an enormous reaction. I presume first they took down the vocal, the sound bite, so you couldn't hear the young man laughing and telling her that the Joey was all right when he clearly wasn't. And, then they took down the video. So clearly they understand that this is a really horrific thing that they've done, and it's outraged people. I mean, we do see other things like this on social media and it upsets us, but this one apparently has really touched people here and overseas.
Thank you so much for joining us. It is very distressing to even watch the footage now. Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening.
Thank you for your interest.
Well, stay with us for more coverage.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.